My name is Ron Bro with TopStep. For today's webinar, we're going to overview the Dell Boomi Integration tool and specific to OpenAir and how Dell Boomi can connect to your OpenAir system and some high-level information about that connection and what that looks like. So let's get into it. First things, TopStep's news and events. We've got 2 user group meetings coming up. We got Boston, July 22nd, and then we'll be in Washington, D.C. So if you're in those areas, you'd like to participate, no cost to you. And we always have very good interactive groups in those 2 cities. Also, the next series webinar coming up is going to be in August 11th, and that one should be very popular. It's around the scripting components in OpenAir and how to benefit from all the scripting opportunities and features that have been released in the last couple of new releases. Okay, let's talk about Dell Boomi. What is Dell Boomi? Think of Dell Boomi as a middleware that lives in the cloud. It can live in the cloud. It's basically there to connect your systems. It can connect your one cloud system to another cloud system via the API connections. So this is where you get cloud-to-cloud integrations. In our example today, we're going to go Salesforce to OpenAir as 2 cloud-based systems that will be facilitated through the Boomi integration. However, Boomi is not limited to cloud only. You can do cloud to on-premise, so if you were integrating, let's say, OpenAir to an SAP or an Oracle, you can do that. You can also do on-premise to on-premise, so if you had Oracle to SAP or some other on-premise systems, you could also connect. So it's a very flexible tool that gives you a lot of opportunities to set up different configurations and different integration options. When you're starting to work with Dell Boomi, there's basically a methodology of 3 steps. The first step is obviously to build your processes. So everything starts with a process. You go through, and we're going to walk through a very simple process, but basically you go through and you build it. You determine what systems are you going to connect to, what data is going to be connected, how data moves, what direction. And so you're going to basically go in and design and build your process. It's very drag and drop, very Visio-ish like, very user-friendly as well. Once you build your integration and test it and make sure data is flowing the way you would expect it to, then you would go in and deploy that. So Boomi runs on something called an Atom. So you would need to go in and deploy an Atom and then go ahead and have your new process scheduled and run on that Atom. Once you're up and running on the Atom and you've got a schedule for your processes, you can run the schedules as often as need be. You could run it every minute, you could run it hourly or daily, what have you. You can then monitor all those runs. So you have a nice dashboard where you can see what data has been being captured, what data is being flowed back and forth between systems. And also getting alerts if there's any sort of errors occurring and what those errors are and being able to monitor those errors as well. So it gives you a very nice dashboard of what is going on in your Dell Boomi processes. So for today specifically, we're going to talk about OpenAir integration, and the most common integration that we've worked with integrating OpenAir using Dell Boomi has been with Salesforce. If any of you are Salesforce and OpenAir customers, you may know there was a legacy integration between Salesforce and OpenAir that's very limited and no longer supported. So we have a lot of customers we've been working with to move from that old legacy and choosing Dell Boomi as their platform of choice. And the reason that Dell Boomi is such a powerful platform for them is because of the pre-built connectors. So even though you're doing API connections, you're not having to build custom API connectors to get to either system. They're pre-built for you, and you can go in and just enter your login information, and then you can start building your processes. So you can go by direction. So we have Salesforce, OpenAir. You can do opportunities, all your standard objects. You can also do custom objects and combinations thereof. So very flexible, unlimited back and forth, unlimited mapping. So you don't have the same limitations that you have today in the standard Salesforce OpenAir integration. And the bottom is just an example of what a typical process, a very simple process looks like. This is what we're going to demonstrate in the next slide. So let me go into my example. So this is Boomi. So when you come in Boomi, you build your processes. This is a client creation process. So this is very typical of the types of processes that we build. Obviously, this one's very simplistic, but it gives you kind of an idea of what this is going to end up looking like. So basically, you start off by building your initial configuration of the connector. So this is logging into Salesforce using a pre-built connection, entering your credentials. This is logging into a sandbox account. It is querying accounts, looking for accounts that match the criteria that you set. So you go in and set parameters. Use last update is very common, where we say we want to bring over anything that's been recently updated or created. Also, you may want to put other limitations in as well, so that you only pull in the data that you want to grab and bring into OpenAir. So you set up your query, and it goes through and then schedules your query. And then once it finds data, it will then flow through your data mapping. And we'll take a look at this mapping in a minute. And it goes through the mapping, and then it logs into OpenAir. This is your connector into OpenAir. And it will then create the client, and then from there we have it going back in through another mapping. And what this mapping does is take the data out of OpenAir, the OpenAir ID, and I'm pushing it back through to Salesforce. So we want to store the IDs from both records on either record. So it's best practice to make sure, because you can use that ID as a flag so that you don't reprocess the same records over and over again and create duplicates inside of OpenAir when you're pulling data from Salesforce. So if we look in Salesforce, I've created an account called AAA Boomi Test, and you'll notice I created a field called OpenAir Account ID, which is blank. So this record is recently modified, and it is not yet in OpenAir, so it is going to be eligible to be picked up by the Boomi process. If I look in Salesforce, in OpenAir, and I look for that client record, you can see that it does not exist. So I don't have it. So let me go back into Boomi, and I'm going to go ahead, and as you're building, you can go in through, and even before you deploy it, you can go in and do your testing. So if I click Test, Boomi gives you a test atom to do all your testing through. So here I can go in and select my test atom, and I can run my test. So as I mentioned, it is now querying Salesforce. So green is good. So we can see that the data record, you can see what documents were found, which is really nice. So I can come in here and see how many records were found that met the criteria. In this case, only one did. I can see by looking at the connection data within that record, I can go in and drill down into a nice format here to say what data. So you can see here's the record information that was found, and all the data that I've told it to go find was brought into that record. and then it went through and it passed that data through the map into OpenAir, again through a mapping, and back into Salesforce. So if I go back into OpenAir now, and I re-hit my search button here, boom, I've got my client. And if I look at my client record, I brought in my client information, and I stored the Salesforce account ID. So this is obviously important to make sure that you're stamping the ID when you're creating the record. But equally important, if I go back into Salesforce, and if I refresh my Boomi test client, you'll notice that the OpenAir account ID was pushed back. So again, so now when I run my query next time, if it's and create only query, it would look for any accounts that don't have an OpenAir account ID, and it would only pull those, so that it's using this as a filter to where it needs to be created, or potentially if you have a create or update, you can use this as a decision tree to go through an update branch versus just a create branch. So when you're building Boomi processes, you basically drag and drop building from a palette and pulling onto a canvas, and you start building. So they give you a list of, reusable components that you can go in and grab and drag and start to work with. There's logical components, there's execution components, and then there's the pre-built connectors that are available. You can build in custom error handling so that if an error occurs, you can have it go down a different path. You can have it sent to email servers so that the alerts can go out. There's also built-in alerting inside of Boomi so that if a process fails once it's been deployed, you can go in and set alerts there as well, in addition to being able to monitor it through dashboarding as well. There's business rules that you can set up. There's flow control so that you can limit the number of records that are being handled at any given time, which is very useful. If you're handling a high volume of data, you'll want to limit how many are being processed so you don't cause any errors by the integration falling on top of each other. Also, as you start to build and save, you can see revisions, and you can always revert back. So if you've got a version of your process you've built and you go in and make a change to it and save it, you can always go back to and further a revision, an earlier revision if you need to go back, which is really helpful if you've made an error or a mistake and you want to go back to where you started from. Connectors, so you may be asking which connectors are available. So there are a lot of connectors that are pre-built. So let me show you inside of the software. So here on the right, you can see is where you can expose your options, your palettes. And here you have your connectors, your execution options, and your logical options. So on the connector front, there are categories of connectors. So you have kind of pre-built get you started. So for example, you could connect to a database. You connect to a mail server. So these would be technology connectors that you could connect to. Application connectors. So here they're constantly adding new connectors to the platform. So you can see there's all the different Google apps you can connect to, Great Plains, Intact, Jira. So Microsoft, all the Microsoft components. Here's NetSuite ERP. You've got NetSuite OpenAir, obviously, which we are doing today. And so here are all the different connections. Salesforce. So when you want to go ahead and enable a connector, you just come in and drag it, and then from here you go in and choose a connector, or you can go in and create a new connection where you would go in now and add your user ID, your password, and off you go. Be aware within OpenAir connector. Let's take a look at the OpenAir connector. You're putting in your www or your sandbox.openair, which is similar with the SOAP after it. Obviously your company ID, your user login, your login password, which is the same as you would normally log in, but you also need the API namespace and key. So in order to integrate Boomi with OpenAir, you have to have access to the APIs. This is an additional fee, an annual fee that OpenAir charges to give you access to the APIs. So you'll need to make sure you get with your account rep if you don't have those before you get started with this building anything through the Boomi process, because it does require API keys. The data maps are really nice. They give you the ability to go in and drag and drop, to go in and build functions, transform your data, and then there's also a Boomi Suggest. So let me show you real quick what that looks like. I go back into my process here. So here's my map. If I go in and configure my map, so here's a map. Here's a typical map. So this is my response from my search. So when it's querying Salesforce account, here's the fields I told it to go find. When it's writing to OpenAir, it's writing to a customer create map, and it's pulling that map in. So now I'm basically dragging and dropping fields from one system to another. So in this case, I can come in and say, bring this account status field, into this other field here. I'm just going to grab something random. So let's do web. So here we have website to website. Okay. So basically you can come in here very simply and just add a mapping by dragging and dropping. There's also, again, you can come in here and do different strings. So if you need to transform the data by doing some sort of a trim, concatenation, you can do that before sending the data into OpenAir. If there's date format changes, like there's a date different changes between OpenAir and Salesforce for certain, last modified date and standard date fields, you would need to go in and do a date transformation before you can send the data. You can do lookups, so from simple lookups where you're basically creating a quick table. For example, in Salesforce, a checkbox is a true or false, but in OpenAir, it's a 1 or blank. So you would go in and say, if this is a checkbox, map it to a true. If it's true in Salesforce, that equals 1 in OpenAir, and send the 1 into the OpenAir table, allowing you to do that transformation so that you can get that checkbox in Salesforce to map to the checkbox in OpenAir. And there's other transformational functions you can do, and you can even do custom scripting to transform data between the two systems. The Boomi Suggest basically allows you to go in, and if you click on Boomi Suggest, it's going to look at the fields. It's going to look at all the other folks that have worked with the product and how they've stored, and it's going to go in and say, it's going to basically make a recommendation. It's going to go, this makes sense because this address should map to this address. So it basically goes through and kind of suggests some mappings based on other processes that have been built. So you'll notice that it has come back with 33 suggestions, 4 that it thinks that could be confident suggestions, and 4 that are possible connections. And so here you can come in and it's going to show you what those are, and from there you can determine which ones you want to accept and which ones you don't. So this is a really quick way to go in and if you're doing pretty standard integration and you can go in and use Boomi Suggest, and it will go in and help you start auto mapping. And there you can go in and modify those maps. Once you build your process, running it in test mode, you can basically run it based on triggers. You can run it schedule as well. So you have a lot of different options. And then once you deploy it to an atom, so Boomi, everything in Boomi processes run on what's called an atom. So whether it's a test atom or you go ahead and deploy it to a production atom, and then go ahead and once you deploy it, then you can go in and set up the triggers and the schedules if you like to get those to run on a regular basis. Once it's up and running, now you can go in and review your dashboard. So here you can go in and monitor all the different runs. Look, if you get errors, you can go back in and research. It'll show you the root of the error, what's caused the error. So you can go in and make those corrections to the data if there's an issue. You can get successes or failures, get the log and the debug details to help you identify what caused the error. You can also subscribe to RSS or email feeds as well. So you might be asking, how does Boomi price? Basically, it's based on the number of systems you're connecting and what features you're looking for. So at the very minimum, you'll notice there's a base option, which is about $12,000 a year. And it's basically, sorry, $5,000 a year. And it is, no, I was right, $12,000 a year. It's 2 connections. So if you were just connecting Salesforce to OpenAir and you needed just very simple connector with not a lot of extra bells and whistles, then you could go with a base connector. As you add more and more connections, it basically determines how many systems. So Salesforce and OpenAir would be 2 connections. Even if it's bidirectional, it's still 2 systems, 2 connectors. A lot of customers start off with a small number of connectors, and then they grow as they find more uses for Boomi and connecting other systems inside their environment. So that's the presentation for today. This is our slide, obviously, for Top Step and myself. Anybody have any questions? I think the floor, I don't think I muted anyone. So
the conference has been unmuted.
Does anyone have any questions? Okay. Small group today, no questions. We will have this recording available on our website, so you can check there probably later next week. Thank for the folks that did join today. Hope you got some benefit out of it, and we'll see you hopefully at the next webinar. Thank you very much and have a good day.